is Alex Mann, and my presentation is on Coretta Scott King. Coretta Scott King was not only Martin Luther King Jr.'s wife, but was also a leader in the civil rights movement. As she carried on her husband's legacy in her own way, she created a strong name for herself. She committed her life to social justice and peace, and continued that journey even after her husband's passing. She was involved long before his death, and she kept carrying on a dream by becoming a civil rights activist and leader, advocate for African American equality, and active in women's rights, and finally helped establish Martin Luther King Day. Miss King was born in 1927 in rural Alabama and saw very severe racism at an early age. Not only her family's home, but her father's businesses were burned down by white men while she was growing up. She had a knack for singing and eventually ended up getting a scholarship to the New England Conservatory of Music in Boston. She met Martin there and married him in 1953. During this time period, there was a lot of racism and discrimination. And after MLK's assassination, Coretta took over and was there for protests and fought for the rights of African Americans. The USA Today interviewed her in 2004, and Coretta claimed she was willing to die to help the people gain freedom. Days after her husband's death in 1968, she led the Poor People's Campaign, which was to help gain economic justice for the poor and those with diverse backgrounds. This was a march on Washington, and as she fought for African Americans and even women, rights for women were very important to her. USA Today claims she never called herself a feminist, but she was a feminist who stood up for her rights. She fought for many groups and gave her everything for her voice to be heard, all while fighting nonviolently to continue her husband's message and dream. While fighting for African American equality, she did so through her faith and song. Faith is something that cannot be overlooked in the King family. When she and her husband moved to Alabama, he was called to a church, and she went with him to help him lead and sing during the service. After Martin Luther King died, she gained a large voice and gained many followers, especially women. She believed women were the most important followers, and even more than men, because of what she was fighting for. She claims women have been the backbone of the entire civil rights movement. Women that include this are like Rosa Parks and other strong independent women during this time who were all responsible for the boycotts and the mass movements during the civil rights period. Coretta was an activist and humanitarian who will be remembered as the one who pushed to make women's voices the center of her fight. She wanted women to speak up and speak out, and not to bury their voices or hide behind the myth of society like their husbands. Her involvement in the world was meant to really show how important it was for women to be a part of the main and major decisions of our world. While not only wanting women at her forefront, she still wanted the fight to be nonviolent and peaceful. Her efforts influenced how the nuclear deal was eventually approached, by instead of showing off how great America is and the nuclear power that we have, she thought, and we took the idea and use it to create peace in relationships instead of taunting our enemies. Miss King also helped establish the King Center, which the point of the center was to help in seeking nonviolence and search for social change. This is also a living memorial dedicated to Martin Luther King Jr. Over 650,000 people annually come to this center and get to learn all about Martin Luther King for a day. It's located in Atlanta in Martin Luther King National Historic Park. Not only this, but Coretta also helped convince Ronald Reagan to pass a bill that would create a holiday that was dedicated entirely to Martin Luther King. This bill was finally passed in 1983, and today that day is known as Martin Luther King Day. To conclude, it has clearly been seen that Coretta Scott King was not only Martin Luther King Jr.'s wife, but was also an advocate for African Americans, which was playing a huge role in the rights of women, as she also continued on what her husband could not finish through the civil rights movement, honored his life in the best possible way. by creating the King Center to help justice and nonviolence prevail, while as well as helping start the national holiday, uh, Martin Luther Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Thank you.